Happy Father's Day. So before we share the message today, I wanted to take this opportunity to dedicate all of our fathers who are present here as well as listening online, virtually. And so I'm gonna ask all of our fathers who are here present to make your way up to the front so we can dedicate you and pray for you all. So go ahead, all the fathers come up to the front. Dear Lord,
Yes, Lord.
bless every father here, near and far, with the best of your spiritual blessings today, Lord. Let him know he is not alone in the tasks you have given him to provide for and support his family. Show him how much you delight in his work and affirm the value of whatever you have given him to do, both as a father and as a child of yours. Confirm his worth daily so he has no reason to doubt whether he is loved in the eyes of his heavenly Father. Create in him a sense of trust in you, knowing that he can count on you to help him lead and protect those dependent on him. Let him know that every unselfish act is for your glory, Lord. Be with them today, be with their families, guide them, give them wisdom, give them good health, help them to be an example for their children and for their families and all men around them, Lord. We uplift them to you, Lord, and we are so thankful for them and what they've done in our lives. We pray all of this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Which everyone knew about Father's Day, other than that it's, on the third Sunday of the month. So, let's start off with the easy question. So, between Mother's Day and Father's Day, which holiday probably generates the most money, or which one do most people spend on? Which one do you think? Between Mother's Day and Father's Day. So, Mother's Day, I think that's pretty obvious, right? So, if I were to tell you Mother's Day, the United States spends about 21 to 22 billion dollars. How much do you think we spend on Father's Day? 1 million, wow. About half that, so about 12 to 13 billion. So we spend almost twice as much on our moms than we do on our, on our dads. Does this mean that we love our moms more than our dads? Some people think that, right? And so the average person actually spends $50 more on their mom than they do on their dad during Mother's Day versus Father's Day. But people actually study this. So psychologists, they try to, answer this question, why do we spend more money on our moms? And they think that it's because we think our moms want more expensive and extravagant and big gifts. Is that true? Do you think, compared to your mom or versus dad, do you think your mom actually wants the more expensive gift and then your dad kind of just, wants the simple, practical gift? That's what I think. And that's what psychologists say is the reason why, right? Dads tend to just want practical gifts, like a razor, or maybe stuff for his car, or maybe clothes, maybe electronics, more simple than what we buy for our moms, which are flowers, bouquets, which costs, almost $100 already. So that's what psychologists think. And speaking of gifts, what do you think is the most popular gift for Father's Day?
Tools.
Tools, that's a good one. Clothes, cologne, alcohol, electronics. Yeah, these are all good. But actually, they did a survey in this country, and they said that the number one gift for dads is actually quality time. So not even a monetary gift. People tend to spend quality time with their dad for Father's Day. Right, spending time with them, maybe doing something for them instead of actually buying something. Whereas moms, it's not really quality time. It's you go and buy the $100 bouquet of flowers, But then the second place is clothing. Third place is gift cards, electronics, and then fourth place is basically everything you guys all said, gardening, home improvement, auto mechanic stuff. One more question. What about when it started. So like if I told you Mother's Day became an official holiday in the United States in 1914, when do you think Father's Day became official?
From the beginning.
Technically, yeah, from the beginning, but like if Mother's Day was officially a holiday in the United States in 1914, when do you think Father's Day became a holiday? About 50 years later. 50 years, 1966. So we spend less money on our dads. We celebrated our dads 50 years after we decided to celebrate our moms. It's not looking good for the dads. It's not looking very good. But even though we tend to spend less on Father's Day, and even though we took a long time to start celebrating our dads, the Bible actually spends a great deal on the importance of fathers and what their roles are in the households, in our families. And ultimately, that's what's most important. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the model father. And when I say model father, I'm not talking about supermodel father. I'm talking about a great example of what a father is, biblically speaking. But the first question is there such thing as a model father? Do you think a model father exists? Right? We know that there's the perfect father. We have a perfect father, a father up above, God himself. He's a perfect father. But obviously none of us can be perfect, right? Human fathers can never amount to the greatness of our Father up above. But that's okay, because a model father doesn't have to be perfect. A model father is just a father that epitomizes what an excellent father is, what an excellent human father is, what fathers can strive to be. And so, if we look in the Bible, do you think there are model fathers? Or is there a model father that we read in the Bible? Yes, yeah, so I've heard Noah, right? Like there's lots of examples, right? People say Noah was a model father. People say Abraham was a model father. People say Joseph was a model father. And even some people say King David was a model father. And so there's lots of examples in the Bible that we can learn from, specifically our fathers who serve as model fathers. They're not perfect fathers, again, they're not perfect fathers, but these are fathers that we can strive to be in a biblical sense. And that's really the only sense that we care about. But today I don't want to talk about a specific father. I wanted to talk about a parable. It's actually one of Jesus' most famous parables. Some people say it's one of the greatest parables of all time. It's the parable of the Prodigal Son. Are you guys familiar with that parable? Some people also know it as the parable of the lost son. And Jesus shares this parable in Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. And so that's going to be the passage that we're going to talk about today. And so just a little recap. What is this parable about? It's about a father and his two sons. You have an older brother, you have a younger brother. The older brother is responsible. He decides to stay with his father. He decides to work hard for his father. And then the younger son is the prodigal son, right? What is a prodigal son? You guys know what prodigal means? Prodigal. So prodigal son is like a son who leaves and then just acts recklessly, gambles, does drugs, hires prostitutes, spends all the money. They just do all these crazy things, all of these irresponsible and reckless things. But then eventually they realize that they made a mistake and they come back home and they try to ask for forgiveness. And so that's the prodigal son, and that's what this parable is about. So you have this older brother, responsible, stays home. This younger brother decides to take his father's stuff and leave and act recklessly, but then he comes back. And so the question is, a lot of people think like this parable is actually looking at sons and how sons should act or should not act. But I decided to look at this and focus on the father. And the father, in my opinion, is a model father. So not a specific father, but a very theoretical father, but a biblical model father. And so that's what we're going to read today. So if you have your Bibles with you, open up to Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. And then I'm going to have the verses up as well if you don't have your Bibles with you. So let's go ahead and read. So Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father,
"Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Squandered, like kind of spend it. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Verse 16. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." Verse 21, the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied. "Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and you never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." Verse 31. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So, very famous parable, very powerful parable. We can learn so many things. We can look at it through so many different angles. We can look at it sort of like how through the perspective of the son, both the younger prodigal son and the older son. But today we're going to focus on the father for today's message. And so in this passage, there's so many things that we can take away, but I pulled out just 5. And so the model father, the first thing we see here, number 1, is the model father has respect for individual autonomy. So we're gonna explain what that means in just a second. Number 2, the model father understands the importance of learning from one's mistakes. Number 3, the model father has a love that refuses to give up. Number 4, the model father is forgiving. And number 5, the model father is just and is fair. So these are going to be the 5 points that we're going to extract from this passage. And obviously listening, but honestly, as I was reading through this, even mothers can learn from these steps as well. So I don't think it's specific to fathers, but in this perspective, in this parable, we are looking through the perspective of father. But mothers, don't tune out, because this applies to you as well. So, number 1, first thing, the model father has respect for individual autonomy. So what does autonomy mean? You guys know? What does autonomy mean? It basically means independence, right? Like if you are autonomous, you are independent. If you have autonomy, you have independence. You are self-sufficient. You make your own decisions. You have your own free will. Your parents are no longer controlling you, telling you what to do, no longer making decisions for you. If you are autonomous, if you have autonomy, you are independent, right? And so The model father has respect for individual autonomy. So let's go back to the verse. And let's read the specific part related to this. So the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. And so clearly this model father, this father in this parable, respected his son's autonomy, right? His son, we can presume, was an adult old enough to go off and make his own decisions, and his father respected that. How would you react? Okay, so think about you. I mean, some of you have young kids and maybe didn't have to deal with this yet, but some of you have had kids that, you know, have grown up, maybe they're adults, and sort of asked to leave or wanted to leave. How would you react if, you know, one of them said, you know, "Let me go, just give me my money. I want to go and do my own thing"? I remember when I went off to college, when I told my parents that I was going to go all the way to New Hampshire, the first thing they said was, "Why don't you just go to the University of Hawaii? It's right here. You don't have to move." But then, you know, obviously I gave them no choice. I said, "Sorry, got a scholarship to New Hampshire, gonna go." But I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard for parents to respect their children's individual autonomy. So in Jewish culture, it's actually pretty common. It's usual for a father, before he dies, to divide his estates to his sons. And there's actually a law that says that the older son has to get more land, so 2/3 of the land, and the younger son gets 1/3. But the sons get the land when the father dies. And so, in this sense, you know, the younger son is like, "Hey, I know you're not dead yet, but give me my 1/3 land. You know, I'm old enough, I want to do my own thing." And so, how do you think how would you have reacted in this situation? I mean, you don't have to shout it out, but just like think to yourself, be honest in this sense. Like if your child just said, "Give me my money, give me my property," and leave, would you have reacted the same way this father reacted? Just sort of divided the land and let him go? You know, I don't know, probably not. But the man respected this autonomy, right? He trusted that he raised his children well. He trusted that he and his wife taught their children the skills to survive, the skills to live on their own, and therefore felt like it was okay that he could let his son go and have his own independence. But that wasn't it, right? Like, it's hard to just let them go because you're going to be scared for them. You're going to be scared if they're going to know how to cook for themselves, to do their own laundry, to, you know, to be safe. And so at the same time, this model father knew that God created humans to have the freedom to obey or disobey, right? He wanted humans to have free will, not force everyone to obey God. He wanted humans to have their own free will. And so this model father understood that. He knew that we were designed this way, and he was going to allow his son the freedom so that he could choose to obey his father or not. And so that's the first thing that fathers and mothers need to think about, need to reflect. Am I giving my children their independent autonomy? I mean, obviously, if they're still children, no autonomy, right? Like, you give them the rules, but this is assuming like they've become an adult. Think about that. Would you respect their individual autonomy, or would you hold on to them for as long as possible? Number 2, the model father understands the importance of learning from one's mistakes. So we know from the passage, right, that he had money. Actually, let's go ahead and read part of the passage. So verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." And so we know that the father had money, he had servants. Don't you think the father could have easily, like when the son said, "I'm leaving, give me my estate," don't you think the father could have easily just sent one of his servants to go follow the son, right? Maybe be disguised and sort of just watch out for the son. And maybe the father could have told the servant, "Okay, if my son is doing anything crazy, if he's spending too much money, if he's, wasting his money on prostitutes, if he's drinking, gambling, if he's just doing anything bad, bring him back home," right? Don't you think that the father could have easily done that? And, I think a lot of fathers kind of do that too, right? Like some fathers will, put tracking devices on their children's phones. Some fathers will maybe like have someone sort of like watch their kids, in secret. And so there's like a lot of things that fathers and mothers can do to just try to fake giving their children this autonomy. And this father could have done it. He had all the money, he had all the servants, and he could have done it. But he didn't. And why? Why didn't he do it? Why did he just trust in his son, allowed him to have his individual autonomy, to be independent, and just let him go? Why? Because he knew and he understood the importance of learning from one's mistakes, right? Obviously I'm not a parent, but for all of you parents, isn't it like one of your missions in life when you had your first kid or when you had your children to make sure you give them everything so that they do not suffer like you did? Like, isn't that always the goal of a parent, right? And so you just give them anything, you remove all their obstacles because you think back in your life and you think about all the obstacles that you've had, and you don't want your children to experience those obstacles. Like, am I right? Is that what I think that's what my parents do for me, right? Like, they try to remove the obstacles so that I don't have the kind of life that they had in the Philippines, right? It's normal. Like, that's a natural parent or parental instinct. But think about what all of those challenges and those consequences and the failures that you experience, all the hardships you've experienced, what did it do for you? It made you stronger, right? It made you hardworking. It made you resilient. Maybe it strengthened your relationship with God. It did all of these things for you. And when you remove those for your children, they're not going to learn that value of hard work. They're not going to learn how to be resilient, how to experience failure, how to struggle, right? And so when you do that, when you're trying to coddle them and hold their hand and like remove all of these obstacles, you're actually doing a disservice to them, right? You are babying them so that they don't learn from their mistakes. But this model father, he understood it, right? He knew that if his son left, that his son was going to face so much temptation, right? He was no longer going to be able to influence his son, so his son was going to be tempted. And you know what? His son did. His son was tempted and he caved in. He spent all the money. He squandered his money on prostitutes, right? He was reckless. But what happened? The son realized that he was wrong. The son realized that he had made a mistake, and he came to his senses and he wanted to come back. And that's the thing that we want to give our children. We want to give them the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, right? If you just coddle them, if you protect them, if you don't let them experience failure, they're not going to learn the same things that you learned growing up. All of those skills like hard work and perseverance, And so let me ask you, with your children, how do you treat them? Are you doing what this model father did and sort of not stand in the way of failure and consequences for your children? Or are you the kind of parent that just wants to remove every single obstacle for your kids? I don't need an answer, just reflect that on yourselves and see, is that something that you can work on? Number 3, the model father has a love that refuses to give up. The model father has a love that refuses to give up. So if we look in that passage, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. So, I think a lot of us has a breaking point. I think a lot of us sort of reach a point where we just give up. We just lose hope, right? Have you guys experienced that? Like where you tried, and then just realized, you know what, this is hopeless, I give up, I can't do this anymore. I think we've all experienced that in our life. But fathers are called to faithfulness, the same faithfulness that is modeled by the father in this story. Can you imagine, so like this father, give me my share of the estate, I'm leaving you. What if the father just said, wow, you ungrateful child, like you don't love me, you're gonna leave me, you're gonna take my estate, and you're just gonna go, you're not gonna stay here and help me. I never want to see you again, never come back. Just imagine if the father did that. And I mean, can you imagine also saying that as well? Maybe you won't say never come back, but can you imagine yourself being very angry? Like, how dare you, ungrateful child, for wanting to leave me after everything that I have done for you? How dare you? But this father could have easily just given up, right? The father could have said, you know what, this son of mine, he doesn't care about me, he doesn't love me, he wants to leave. I don't care about him anymore. I'm just going to forget about him. Imagine if that father did that. And can you imagine, I mean, there are fathers out there that do that to their children, right? Their children just, committed something so terrible that the family disowns them, right? Like that happens a lot in our society. But imagine if that father did that here. Then, I mean, obviously we wouldn't be learning about this model father if the father did that. But what did this father do? Right? What did this father do? The father let him go and just carried on with his responsibilities, right? His father just continued working in the fields, did his thing, his son was with him, and he kind of moved on. But at the same time, he also was aware of his broken heart, right? I mean, this father probably had a broken heart. This father just had to say goodbye to his son. And so, of course, this father probably had a broken heart. But I think it's important for us to learn how to live with a broken heart. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. Take courage, I have overcome the world. And so, we're not free from trouble. We're not free from broken hearts. But God has called us to continue what God has called us to do. Despite these challenges, despite the broken heart, we need to move on and do what God has called us to do. And that's what this father did. The father just continued to work in the fields. But notice, the father's love was so great that he didn't give up hope, right? How do we know that he didn't give up hope? If you look back at the passage, it says that while the son was a far way off, so that means the father was looking out in the horizon. And someone's not going to look out into the horizon if they've already given up, if they're not even searching for their son anymore, right? They're not going to look at the horizon. What's the point? But this father was looking out in the horizon. He probably looked out in the horizon every day. He had this sliver of hope that his son was going to come back. And by chance, one of the days that the father was looking out in the horizon, he saw a figure that he could not yet recognize, but deep in his heart, he knew that that was his son. And so that's how we know his father's love just refused to give up, even though his heart was broken, even though, his son may have made a mistake. His love for his son never gave up, refused to give up. He held on to that hope. And so for you fathers here, think about just times when your child just did something so terrible, broke your heart or made you so mad. Maybe they left. Maybe they left the family, maybe they're doing something that you don't agree with. The model father's love for them refuses to give up. So hold on to that sliver of hope, pray for that child, and allow God to work. Allow the Holy Spirit to work. It is in God's control. Number 4, the model father is forgiving. I think this is probably the most obvious of the characteristics that we see in this passage. Right? So what do we see? So he saw the son, and in verse 21, the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Think. What would you have done if you were this father? You saw your son, you knew that he was being reckless, made some poor choices, or maybe you didn't even know that, but you're still heartbroken that he left, and you see him coming. What would your initial reaction be? Would you want to say, if your son came and was like, "I'm sorry, Dad, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have left, I made some bad choices," I feel like our first instinct might be, I told you so. Like, you shouldn't have left. I told you it was going to be hard. You should have just stayed here. You should have just worked for me. You would have had everything, but you decided to leave, right? Like, I think that is human instinct to want to just place blame or to prove that you were right. But that's not what this father did, right? This father, my gosh, just didn't even let his son finish talking, didn't even let his son sort of grovel to his dad. He just said, "Nope, we're gonna have a celebration." The father could have also just, accepted the son's proposal to be like, "Make me your slave," right? Like, the father could have been, like, even if the father didn't say, "I told you so," the father could have easily said, "Yeah, you deserve some consequences. You're now one of my servants," right? The father could have easily done that, but he didn't. Instead, he gave him 3 items that have significant implications or meanings, right? So he gave him a robe, right? He gave him a robe. What does a robe signify? The robe signifies honor, right? So he is saying, I don't care that you had prostitutes. I don't care that you spent all this money. I don't care that you left me. You are my son, and you have honor for coming back, right? So he gave him a robe. He also gave him, what? What was the second thing he gave him? A ring. And what does the ring signify? The ring signifies authority, right? So he is giving his son authority, even though his son left and made a few mistakes and spent all his money, right? The father didn't care. He gave him a ring, which signifies authority. And lastly, what did his father give him? Sandals, shoes, right? This is important because slaves didn't wear sandals or shoes, right? Only their children, the son, could wear sandals and wear shoes. And so the fact that the father gave him sandals meant that he refused to accept the son's proposal to make him a servant. He saw his son as his son and gave him shoes and not allow him to be barefoot. And so these 3 things, right? And then the shoes obviously was a sign of freedom. And so the father was forgiving. Could you have been this forgiving, you think, if you were in his shoes? Could you have been this forgiving? I don't know. I imagine, like, if I were a father, it would be kind of hard. Maybe I'll be forgiving, but not this forgiving. Like, I don't know if they deserve a party for, making all of these bad choices, but this father did that. And finally, 5th point, the model father is just and fair. And so we're going to read the specific lines there. Meanwhile, this is where the older son comes in now. The older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and you never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitute comes home, you will kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he was found. And so I know that this fifth point, right, the model father is just and fair, kind of seems a bit weird, right? Like, doesn't it seem like the father played favoritism here? Like, don't you think the father seemed to favor the younger prodigal son? Like, I bet you that was our initial instinct. It was my initial instinct when I read this. I was like, wow, this father loves the young son. This older son, so responsible, stayed home, worked for him, and the son never even got a celebration. But what we need to remember is that fair does not mean equal, right? Fair does not mean equal. If the father was equal, then he would have given both sons a feast, if the father was equal. But the father wasn't equal. The father was fair. So remember that. Fair does not mean equal. So when your child says, that's not fair, why does he get that and I didn't? Well, because I'm not equal, you tell them. I'm not equal, I am fair. And so what exactly does fair mean? What does fair mean? If fair doesn't mean equal, what does fair mean? Fair means providing what is reasonable, adequate, and appropriate for each individual person, right? Imagine you have two kids, a 20-year-old college student, 10-year-old child, right? And you're gonna give them money, allowance. If you're equal, you give them both $20, right? If you're equal. And then maybe the older son would be like, hey, that's not fair. Why does so-and-so, he's 10 years old, he gets $20, like I need more money, right? So to be fair, you give them what is appropriate and adequate for each individual person. So maybe, hey, college student, right? He needs to buy deodorant. He needs to buy food. So maybe I give him $100. To this 10-year-old son, he doesn't need $100. Why would I give him $100? Maybe I give him $10, $20. That is fair, right? It's not equal, but it's fair. And that's what the model father is. The model father is fair. And so when we look in this case here, how is this model father fair? He said right in the last line, you are with me and you have everything. And so when you compare the two sons, actually the older son had it better off. The older son had everything. Everything the father owned, the older son had. And the older son didn't realize how blessed he truly was, that he had everything at his disposal, right? He had a very happy and comfortable life. The son was suffering. The younger son, the prodigal son, right? I mean, he had all this stuff, but he was suffering. And so this father was fair, right? He thought his younger son was dead, and of course you're going to celebrate if you thought your younger son was dead and that he came back. So this is necessarily equal, right? Because equal doesn't sometimes make people happy, but then I think we tend to do that with our children, right? We think being equal is actually better, but it's not. We need to be fair. And so remember that there is only one perfect father, and that's God. And so, this message is not to say that if you do these 5 things, you're going to be the perfect father, because, no human father can ever be perfect. But that's okay, because we have lots of models in the Bible, right? We said Noah, Abraham, Moses, Joseph, King David. And then, of course, in this parable, we have lots of model fathers. And so in this case here, from this parable, we learned that the model father, what? Next slide. The model father has respect for individual autonomy. The model father understands the importance of learning from one's mistakes. The model father has a love that refuses to give up. The model father is forgiving. And the model father is just and fair. And so, for all of our fathers here today, whether you're here physically or listening online, which of these are you doing a good job with? I want you to reflect and think about these 5 things. Which of these are you doing a good job with, or you've done a good job with, and which of these do you struggle with? And it's okay. It's okay to say that you struggled with all 5 of these things, right? The father in this parable was the model father, and so the best that we can do, or that you can do as fathers, is just to strive for these things. And just remember, you can't do this alone, right? You're not expected to do this alone. Just continue to pray for the strength, the patience, the wisdom, the courage to do all of these things, because you can't do it alone, but with and through God, you can. So happy Father's Day. And I hope that you sort of apply these 5 things, all of you fathers. And like I said, mothers, you can use this as well with your children. And for some of you it might not apply right now, but think ahead when your children go off to college and see if you can apply these things. God bless.